Okay, firstly I'd like to say thank you to the Somerville Foundation for inviting me to speak. I'm quite nervous and I've been fighting a cold all week, so just bear with me because I'll probably have to drink quite a lot of water during this. But I'm going to talk to you about the journey, my journey from heart failure to HeartHub. So, for those of you who don't know me or follow me already, I was born in 1981, the second child to two healthy parents, and not long after I was born, a nurse noticed that I was blue. I was initially diagnosed with a heart murmur and told it would probably correct itself, and then was sent home with my parents to return 2 weeks later for a checkup. Within those 2 weeks, I became more and more unwell, and so I went back to the hospital via the GP and was seen by a specialist consultant. So the appointment happened to be on a Friday afternoon, and the consultant was called away to an emergency, so he wasn't able to see me. After being seen by a registrar, my parents were once again sent home. So the next day they received a phone call, that was Saturday morning, from the consultant apologising that he wasn't able to see me in clinic, but that he would be coming to my house to talk to my parents that day. So my dad apparently thought this was amazing service, magical NHS. My mum, who was a nurse, obviously knew quite different. So the consultant arrived that morning, and his visit obviously changed our family life forever. So I was diagnosed with ventricular septal defects, which, according to these excellent infographics that I have the permission from Save the Heartbeat to use, occurs in between 2 and 5 of every 1,000 live births. I also, just to add to the mix, had pulmonary stenosis, which happens in about 8 out of every 10,000 live births. So, just for good measure, I also added in transposition of the great arteries, which again apparently occurs in 2 to 5 out of every 10,000 live births. I didn't do these figures myself, so I'm relying on these to be correct. As you can see, I'm obviously very lucky at getting things that have a slim chance of happening. It doesn't relate to lottery numbers, so there's absolutely no point in asking me. I am not lucky like that. So following the consultant's visit that morning, I was taken to Myrtle Street, which a number of people here also wear, I know. According to my mum, they handed over a poorly blue baby and got back a pink one after an emergency surgery. So following that surgery, I was able to return home, and life kind of got back to what we would deem as normal. 5 days after my first birthday, I had a shunt, and then things went to kind of routine appointments and just getting on with everyday life. When I was around 6, my heart started to fail, and my parents faced the prospect of palliative care, just taking me home, or looking at a transplant and the potential for that. So it was about that time that we were introduced to Dr. Roxanne Mackay, for whom we will be eternally grateful. And she said that she would be able to perform a modified Fontan on me, and so in December 1988, I had that done. So as those of you who will follow me know, I did celebrate that quite heavily with a number of glasses of champagne for its 30-year anniversary last year. So that was my final open heart surgery, touch wood. So as you can see, the ICU was a very different place back then. This is me. It's about 24 hours post-op, and I'm told that the empty chair by my bed was quite possibly filled with Dr. Mackay, who generally spent the entire night with her patients after she performed surgery on them, and did it to not just me, but pretty much a number of others. So what I remember from the first couple of days is not keeping anything down. So I vividly remember drinking milky, sugary tea from a bottle. I've no idea why. I was 5 years old. I don't know what I was thinking, and I definitely cannot stomach milky tea now. The thought of it makes me feel sick. But it's probably because of that, to be honest. Anyway, nothing stayed down at all until Dr. Mackay gave me a can of Coke, which apparently she had brought over, or she brought over herself, and that was the first thing that I managed to keep down, and within a few hours I was out of intensive care and back on the ward. So that is still my hangover cure now. I don't think that she meant that to happen, but thank you anyway, it's an absolute gem. So life following the Fontan returned to normal. So with the exception of routine follow-ups, as far as I was concerned, I was cured. I used to tell people that I had a hole in my heart, but I was fixed now, and then that was it was done. During my teen years, I had the odd bout of palpitations, and that continued into adulthood. But because I'm an incredibly sensible individual, I just ignored them and carried on regardless. A couple of times it landed me in the hospital, but other than that, I didn't really bother. I played sports, I flew long haul, drank alcohol, got tattoos, jumped out of planes, everything that Petra tells me not to do on a daily basis. And as you can see, one of the biggest regrets is that I also let my mum loose with a crimper on my hair in the 80s. So I even fortunately got the chance to meet Dr. Mackay for the first time again a few years ago, and the opportunity to thank her, although I'm not sure that's ever going to be enough. In May 2016, I ran the Manchester 10K. Well, I completed the Manchester 10K. I did definitely not run it all, but it happened anyway. And life was good. I was fit and healthy and normal as far as I was concerned. And then in August 2016, CHD entered my life once again. The 24th of August, to be exact, and thank God for Snapchat filters because I looked horrendous. So this is me about 4 days in with palpitations in Manchester Royal Infirmary. They were back for good, and unfortunately they weren't to be ignored. So after 3 attempts with adenosine, and I know that I'm in a room full of people who are likely to have experienced adenosine, so you'll know how horrific that was, and a cardioversion, my rhythm finally returned to normal. Life for me didn't. So on the 20th of December that year, I went back to MRI for my first ablation. I'm on number 4 now and counting, so there we go. By the time I got there, although I'd managed to get my mum to do all my Christmas shopping, which was a win, I was very tired, very fed up. I felt quite alone. I know that's obviously something that we will be discussing in more detail today. And really uncertain for the first time in a long time. I was actually having to live with CHD affecting my life on a daily basis. And to be completely honest, it wasn't a nice place in my head. I had surgery, obviously the ablation surgery, and after a few hours came back to the ward. Despite feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, the next day I actually did feel back to normal, as in healthy in my own body. And again, that was it. I was cured, off I was going. So for the most part, in 2017, the first part at least, things went back to normal. But I did have a number of different things that I also had to deal with. So as well as the stress of now thinking that CHD was fully back in my life, I was dealing with appointments in the hospital and the GP, INRs, blood clinics, medications like beta blockers, furosemide, warfarin, things that I'd never had to deal with before. And if I'm honest, I really didn't want to deal with them at the time, and I probably still don't want to deal with them now. My initial attitude of feeling sorry for myself gave way after a little pep talk, and I started to feel more positive about the future. So we started to make plans again, which was something that I'd stopped doing. I was determined to just kind of live life and make the most of feeling better, and part of the planning was booking a holiday over Christmas. In May 2017, the ablation failed, and by the December, which is these pictures here, having been in and out of A&E most months with arrhythmia, We had to cancel our Christmas holiday, which I promise I'll forgive you at some point, Petra, but this is going to be mentioned a lot. And I was referred up to Newcastle to look at surgical options, and for the first time ever, transplant was mentioned. So as you can probably imagine, transplant being a pretty big word and a big thing, it was quite a lot to deal with all at the same time. So cue another not particularly great Christmas, 2017, and despite having an amazing network of friends and family, I really did feel very scared and alone. In 2017, despite trying to get used to CHD being a big part of my life again, I didn't really remember it from when I was a child, and I think that's possibly a good thing now I think about it now, but I realised quite quickly that I'd never really dealt with the psychological aspect, and the stuff that Lisa was talking about earlier really hit home with me, because it was clearly something that I just hadn't addressed. I remember as a child feeling overwhelmed a few times about everything, but as a grown up I'd learned to kind of just tune it out, ignore it, not even think about it. And at the time I would probably have said that was because I didn't want to worry friends or family or burden anybody with it, but I think in reality it was just I didn't want to deal with it myself. I was looking at a path that I didn't know the end of, and I did not want to go down it. So one thing that I have learned in life is that generally, or pretty much always, if you're feeling something, somebody else is too. I work in social media, and there's always a lot of connecting. I knew how that would work. And so despite the fact that I really didn't want to talk about it, I made a decision that I really should talk about it. But I also realised that I didn't want to talk about it with the people around me. I didn't feel like they would fully understand what it was like living with CHD. I also didn't think my friends or family would understand. Therapy, I wasn't really ready for. I didn't want to sit down and unpick all those feelings. I just wanted to know that I wasn't alone in feeling them. And so despite being a pretty private person, I decided to do what everybody in the world seems to be doing now. Started a page on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram to talk about CHD. So the CHD life was born, or initially my heart life or my CHD life, and various other different ones that I went through before I actually published the page. Initially I made sure that I didn't invite anybody that I knew to the page. I knew people would find out eventually, and that obviously things would probably be shared, and it wasn't that I was trying to hide anything. It was more the fact that this was for me. It was something that I wanted to be able to feel that I was completely open and honest about. And for a long time there was stuff that I didn't want to talk face to face with people about, but I just kind of wanted to vent, and I kind of knew that in doing that other people might relate to the things that I was venting about. So I started to share my story in, actually it was January 2018, which I only found that out when I was writing this speech. It feels like I've been doing it since 2016 or even longer. But part of that was that I figured it would probably be my last year with a Fontan. I knew that transplant assessments were coming up. I knew there was quite a lot of big changes, and I just wanted an outlet where I could speak about different issues, really. So as I say, with working in social media, I knew that I'd be able to connect pretty much with others using both those platforms, and I hoped that I might find somebody out there who was going through a similar experience to me. So I shared pretty much everything: the ups and downs, the worries, the funny stories, the medications, the appointment struggles. And by struggles, I mean me turning up at the wrong hospital or on the wrong year, at the wrong time, that type of thing. But I also realised that despite that stupidity, it wasn't just me that was doing stuff like that. So as a child, pre-internet, I had no way of connecting with anybody else who had CHD. And as an adult, I wouldn't join CHD groups really, and I didn't come to events like this because when I was well, they weren't relevant as far as I was concerned. It's probably just another way of completely ignoring what's gone before. But it didn't feel like I belonged in those groups. But suddenly, when I was sharing my page, those people from those groups were contacting me and sharing those stories, and suddenly they weren't just about people who were sick with a heart condition in those groups, they were about people who were actually going through what I was going through, who were asking the questions that I was asking, sharing the stories, contacting me and thanking me for being so open. And these groups and this page took on a completely new meaning for me. So they became a big part of my recovery. They were my support network. I met a lot of new friends. I met people who had what I had, who were born with transposition of the great arteries, PSD and VSDs, the triple. I met people who were older and younger than me who had those things. I didn't know anyone prior to starting this page who had a Fontan, and now I know 4 or 5. I met people who, like me, had lived their entire lives feeling like they were cured, only to collapse on the street or while doing a sporting event and find that CHD was actually something that doesn't leave you ever. I met people who were due to have surgery again for the first time, but they were having it as an adult and they didn't have a clue how to even process it. And I met, in inverted commas, although I have today, people who had had far more surgeries than me, one of whom you'll meet today, and who had a far, far better attitude about it than I did about the prospect of having one more. So I'm thankful to say that I became an actual member of the CHD community. And every day, whilst sharing my story, I was getting messages from patients, parents, doctors, asking me about my journey, what did I do when I had certain symptoms, how did I keep a good attitude, which I don't all the time, just to be clear. And I started to talk to people online, both privately and via my page, about an idea that I was kind of formulating in my head. Just a way to take away the anxiety about certain things that I was feeling. I started to make notes about what people were telling me they felt hard to manage in everyday life. I started making videos about my appointments and my tests, and just general things about questions that people had sent me, or what do you do about your scar, that type of thing. And then finally I started meeting with different companies who I hoped would take the little idea that I had in my head at the end of 2016 and make it into something that myself and a number of other people could actually benefit from. Excuse me. So eventually I found one, and HeartHub was born. The app specifically designed for CHD people and with the help of the CHD community. So what does HeartHub do? Well, in the famous words, it does what it says on the tin. So it has a heart rate monitor, an ECG style trace, which works in the same way as a pulse ox machine. It's got a mood and a weight tracker. It contains detailed medical emergency information, medical document storage. It will have appointment and medication reminders for both time of day and dosage. It'll have INR BP trackers for those who monitor at home, an A&E locator just in case anybody else is like me and decides to get sick when they are hours from home and has no idea where the nearest A&E is, and a GPS tracker, again, just in case. There's also going to be a family profile which will feature 2 different profiles, one for an adult and one for a child, which we're working with Alder Hay and Anna and the nurses at Alder Hay to try and make that so that we can use that to help teens who are transitioning from paediatric care into adult care and learning to manage their own symptoms and treatment as they go along. So if you can spot the deliberate mistake on this slide, there is a prize in it for you. This is what happens when you don't properly check the slides and you're quite high on Lemsip whilst you put it together. It does say BMP instead of BPM. It doesn't say that on the app, I can assure you. I've just used the wrong slide. So one of the biggest things that I've found over the years, or the past 2 years, is the feeling of anxiety about managing aspects of CHD. So I'm a planner and I like to know what's going to happen, and CHD does not help me with that at all. So as an adult, everything's on me, and that's absolutely fine because that is what life is. It's my care, it's my body, and I'm perfectly happy to advocate in that way. But it's also a massive burden, and it's really hard trying to manage the various aspects of my health along with other parts of life. So starting or running a business, working full time, running a household, trying to cope with the general uncertainties and planning for the future that arises when you're an adult with CHD. And as I obviously look out here, I realise I'm not alone in that at all. It can't just be me who feels that burden. Some days it's completely overwhelming. And I'm thankful that on those days I've been able to turn to the community of CHD adults and parents and doctors in order to help me, whether I've done so via my group, via the group sorry, or via my blog. It never ceases to make me feel better. And it's because of the support that I've received and the messages and the feedback that HeartHub even exists. And it's the reason why I feel it's so important that we use it to give back to the CHD community. So what we want HeartHub to be is something that will grow and adapt along with the growing population of ageing CHD adults. What HeartHub will do is work with charities like the Somerville Foundation in the UK, Heart Kids in Australia, the American Heart Association in America, and look at how we can support them whilst they support you, or me, or us. So the next step for HeartHub is basically we're going to get the app out there, ready for people to give feedback on. I'm really excited to say that we've got hundreds of people all over the world who are already signed up to try it. It's going to be available on both iOS and Android phones straight away, so you can just pick the one that you use. You can register on the website, or if you don't feel like you want to register yet, you can follow us on social media, and when the app's ready, we'll tell you you can try it out then. So once we've done that, what we're looking to do is looking for ways to support the CHD community outside of the app. So what we want is to help HeartHub users get involved in research, which is not only going to obviously help future generations, but also what I feel is vitally important is help us as we age to understand and help the medical community understand what do we need, what special things do we need to have in place, what care structures need to be there. We are amazingly an ageing population. Obviously, we now outnumber the children in terms of survival. And so what we need to do is make sure that we've got the right research and we link with the right companies and we've got the right tools to make sure that this continues to carry on. So I just want to finish by being completely real about CHD because it's hard. It's getting harder as you get older. It doesn't get any easier, I don't think. But what I wanted to do with HeartHub was just take the bits that can be managed and put them in a place where you can manage them, and hopefully take some of the anxiety that I feel out of the whole process. And hopefully that in doing that and sharing it with everybody, it will help the users to do that too. So, thank you.